What if I told you about a place? Somewhere where 1 in 4 children live in poverty. Somewhere with suicide rates 7 times higher than the national United States average. Somewhere where the youth is more likely to end up in jail than to graduate high school. You're probably thinking this sounds like a pretty horrible place. Maybe you're thinking of an underdeveloped nation, a third world country. But what if I told you this place is closer than you think? This is a place in our very own continent. The place or places I'm referring to are Canadian First Nations reserves. And today I will be sharing the horrible reality some of these people are forced to live in, and we'll go into detail on the struggles these people face with alcoholism, suicide, and poverty. One of the biggest problems plaguing Canadian Aboriginal communities today is alcoholism. In fact, the amount of people that reported heavy drinking during the week was more than double in Aboriginal communities compared to the rest of Canada. And nearly 75% of the Aboriginal communities reported alcoholism as a major problem in their communities. It's not even just the adults that are being affected. Alcoholism is affecting the adolescents of these communities as well. Adolescents in these communities are almost 3 times more likely to be classified as heavy drinkers compared to the rest of Canada. Studies have shown that if your parents were heavy drinkers, you are 3 to 4 times more likely to become a heavy drinker yourself, which makes this a deadly recurring cycle. But how exactly did it get this bad? It's almost certainly not genetic. So what could have caused this culture-wide problem? One of the major reasons is unemployment. First Nations reserves are often full of people and not enough jobs. This causes stress, which in turn can lead to alcohol abuse, and with lack of jobs often comes a lack of money, or in other words, poverty. Poverty is another major struggle facing Canadian Aboriginals, and it is a problem rooted in how the Canadian government treats these people, as well as the lack of opportunities First Nations people have. Nearly 30% of Canadian First Nations people live in poverty, and when we look at children alone, that number rises to 47%. Almost half of First Nations people currently live in poverty. The number is nearly 4 times the Canadian national average. These numbers are staggering and show a major problem in First Nations communities. And while part of the problem may stem from problems with self-motivation, I think a larger part of the problem could be racism towards First Nations peoples. This, combined with a long history of poverty in First Nations groups, creates an incredibly restrictive environment, one that lacks much real opportunity and one that is very hard to break free of. Aboriginal parents have children who they can barely provide for, which leads these children to have less opportunities, which in turn leads to these children to grow up to be adults in poverty, and the cycle continues. This cycle is a major problem in Canada and one that the government is doing little to nothing to help. So with all these issues facing the Indigenous, it's not hard to see how these issues could compile and create the biggest problem of all, the Indigenous suicide epidemic. Suicide is a major problem facing many Indigenous communities across Canada. An Indigenous person living on a reserve in Canada is nearly 4 times as likely to commit suicide as a non-Indigenous Canadian. In fact, the leading cause of deaths for Indigenous Canadians under the age of 44 is suicide. Suicide is a major problem in these communities. One community even had to call a state of emergency because they had 11 suicide attempts in a single night. Another community had 100 suicide attempts in 6 months in a community of just 2,000 people in total. These numbers should be staggering and show just how bad the conditions of the reserves have gotten. So bad that this many natives have felt so hopeless, so beaten down that the only way out is suicide. I hope that some of you have had your eyes open today. I hope that I was able to show you how terrible the living conditions of Native Canadians is. The treatment of the Native Canadians by Canada as a whole is appalling, and something that I feel needs to be brought to the spotlight more, as it is something very close to people all across Canada, and it's something that needs to be changed. Thank you.